If you work harder than ever and still feel like you're not moving forward, it's not your fault. It's not bad luck. It's the system. Today we're going to rip off the mask of capitalism to show you how it was designed not to liberate, but to enslave. And most importantly, we're going to understand what Marx said about this machinery that turns your life into fuel for the luxury of a few. Imagine a chessboard where the pieces always start in the same position. The pawns, millions of workers, advance with effort, step by step. But the king and queen, the owners of capital, move freely, protected by all the other pieces. The outcome is decided before the game even begins. That is capitalism, a rigged game where the majority are born losing. Karl Marx understood this more than 150 years ago. He explained that the wealth you see in skyscrapers, mansions, and bank accounts doesn't appear out of nowhere, it is labor transformed into gold for a handful. The trick lies in surplus value. You generate value with your effort, but only receive a fraction of it as wages. The rest is taken by whoever controls the factory, the land, or the company. It is legalized theft disguised as a contract. And wages are not designed to set you free, but to keep you tied down. You pay rent, food, transport, utilities. If anything is left, it barely lasts a few days. The solution they offer: credit, loans, cards. Chains disguised as opportunities. So you work not only for your boss but also for banks and creditors who feed off your future. Meanwhile, the system sells you the illusion that, if you work hard, you'll get ahead. A handful of isolated examples are used as propaganda to uphold the lie of social mobility. But the ladder is broken, millions climb a few steps only to fall back, ensuring there is always a crowd ready to accept low wages and degrading conditions. The cost of living becomes an invisible tax. Every year rent goes up, food goes up, energy goes up. And when it seems like it can't get worse, they invent new ways to charge you. Exploiting you isn't enough, they need to exhaust you. Because exhaustion and fear are the strongest chains. Fear of losing your job, of not being able to pay your bills, of ending up on the street. That fear turns exploitation into obedience. And so you don't look upward for the real culprits, there exists an entire ideological machine. The media, advertising, even schools repeat the same dogma: you are poor because you didn't try hard enough. The cruelest lie of the system is making the victim carry the blame of the executioner. Marx had already warned us, it's not chance, not destiny, not laziness. It is structure. It is a mechanism designed to enrich a few at the expense of the lives of millions. Look around, we live on a planet capable of producing enough wealth so that no one goes hungry, no one sleeps on the streets, no one dies from lack of medical care. And yet, the reality is different. A tiny elite accumulates fortunes impossible to spend, while billions work tirelessly just to survive. How can this contradiction be explained? Karl Marx made it clear: it is not a coincidence, it is a design. Work, which should be a source of dignity and creativity, becomes a chain. We don't work to live, we live to sustain a machine that squeezes every minute of our lives. Wages function as a calculated dose, enough to keep you standing, never enough to break free. And when that wage isn't enough, because it never is, credit appears as the miraculous salvation. Cards, loans, financing, a contract that mortgages your future and turns debt into an invisible prison. It's modern slavery, signed and sealed legally. But capitalism isn't content with controlling your present, it also needs to capture your tomorrow. Hence the illusion of social mobility. They tell us, if you work hard, you'll succeed. A tale repeated endlessly, reinforced by isolated success stories used as propaganda. The truth is that the majority remains stuck in the same place, because the system is designed that way. The ladder is broken, and every attempt to climb ends in more exhaustion and frustration. Meanwhile, daily life becomes a constant battle. Rent rises, food rises, energy rises. Even what once were basic rights are turned into privatized services you must pay for. You don't need an armed guard to feel controlled, fear does the job. Fear of losing your job, fear of illness without insurance, fear of falling into absolute misery. That fear is capitalism's most effective tool. It doesn't need iron chains, it installs itself directly in your mind. And when fear begins to turn into anger, the ideological apparatus steps in. The media, advertising, official speeches all repeat that poverty is your fault. That you didn't work hard enough. That you didn't manage well. That you failed. It's the most brutal inversion of truth, making the victim bear the blame for the crime. At the top of this machinery, a minority accumulates fortunes that could eradicate global hunger several times over. But instead of using that wealth to improve lives, they circulate it in financial markets that produce nothing, multiplying money only among themselves. Below, the majority exhaust themselves in endless workdays, giving away time, the only currency that never comes back, in exchange for mere survival. And here lies the central point that Marx warned us about: the heart of the system is surplus value. The value you produce but never enjoy. Every product, every service, every click, every delivery, every extra hour feeds a mechanism that takes your energy and transforms it into someone else's profit. It doesn't matter if it's a 19th century factory or an app on your phone, the logic is the same. Extract to the last cent, the last second, the last breath. As long as this structure remains intact, capitalism will continue devouring lives while calling it progress. The only way to break the cycle is not to wait for miracles or believe in empty promises, it is to understand, to organize, and to fight. Because the wealth that sustains the world is already created. What's missing is for it to return to those who produce it, the workers. We were sold the word flexibility as if it meant freedom. But behind that modern disguise, all they did was shift the risks onto the worker. You provide the tools, you pay for transport, you cover the insurance, and you're still expected to be grateful for the opportunity. This isn't innovation, it's the same exploitation as always, dressed up with new words. Every day, the cost of survival bites into your wages like an invisible pack of wolves. Rent takes half. Food takes another chunk. Electricity, gas, transport, internet, every bill is another fong in your pocket. If anything is left, it goes to debts. And if nothing is left, credit steps in, loans and cards promising solutions but only digging a deeper hole. Marx understood this before anyone: the system needs to keep you on the edge, always tired, always worried, with no space to rebel. That exhaustion isn't a coincidence, it's a strategy. Because from exhaustion comes fear. Fear of losing your job. Fear of getting sick and not being able to pay. Fear of growing old without a future. That fear is the invisible leash that forces you to accept anything: impossible hours, miserable wages, daily humiliations. Capital isn't sustained by kindness or competition, but by coercion. And the most effective coercion isn't physical, it's psychological. But how do they stop that fear from turning into collective rage? Simple, with propaganda. Corporate media manufacture ready-made scapegoats. They tell you poverty is the fault of migrants, of the unemployed, or of yourself for not knowing how to manage. The result, the real culprits, the owners of banks, corporations, and land, remain untouchable, shielded behind speeches of social responsibility. They hand out calculated crumbs, call it philanthropy, and pose as saviors while keeping the entire banquet for themselves. At the center of this machinery lies work, but not as liberation, rather as a sentence. You don't work to build a future, you work to postpone financial collapse for one more month. And the most perverse part is that the system convinces you this is normal life. That adulthood means being in debt, exhausted, and resigned. It's a prison without bars, the chains are bills, interests, unreachable goals, resumes you must constantly update, supervisors, and apps watching you. Everything designed to keep you busy surviving. Meanwhile, a microscopic elite concentrates fortunes that could wipe out world hunger again and again. And yet, they prefer to invest in obscene luxuries, yachts costing as much as the yearly budget of entire cities. It's parasitism elevated to a virtue. And below, the majority drowns in the math of servitude, wages calculated to keep you just alive enough to keep working, but never free. And when someone dares question this injustice, the same discourse repeats, the problem is you. You don't work hard enough. You don't try hard enough. It's the most effective manipulation of all, making the victim defend the executioner. The indebted worker applauds the billionaire who exploits him, convinced that one day he too will get there. It's the old, divine lottery, recycled into capitalist form, empty promises of social mobility that only serve to keep everyone in place. Marx had already warned in the 19th century, as wealth concentrates in the hands of a few, misery multiplies in the hands of the many. That is the open wound capitalism tries to cover with speeches about progress. And that wound, unless it is healed at the root, will keep infecting humanity's future. Imagine a massive staircase. At the bottom, millions struggle every day just to stay standing. At the top, a few enjoy unimaginable luxuries. But that staircase isn't built for everyone to climb, it's broken, guarded, and designed so that the majority never leave the ground. Capitalism has privatized what should be basic rights: housing, food, energy, health, education. Everything has become a commodity. It doesn't matter if it's a roof, a plate of rice, or medicine, there's always a price, always someone profiting from the need. And the more essential it is, the more expensive it becomes. That's why living feels like suffocation. Wages only stretch far enough to delay the fall, never to guarantee stability. An illness, a layoff, an unexpected bill, and everything collapses. But what sustains the system isn't just the economy, it's fear. Fear of hunger, of unemployment, of falling even lower. That fear is the invisible whip forcing millions to accept endless workdays, constant humiliations, and miserable wages. Marx knew it, fear is the glue that holds the capitalist order together. And to prevent fear from becoming awareness, there is an ideological machine working 24/7. Corporate media repeat the same lie: the rich are rich because they deserve it, the poor are poor because they failed. Stories of overcoming adversity are presented as proof that anyone can make it, even though they are rare exceptions that prove the rule. It's like showing a drop of water in the middle of a wildfire and claiming anyone can put out the flames. Meanwhile, at the top, the rich don't just accumulate money, they also concentrate political, cultural, and moral power. They dictate laws, control universities, finance campaigns, decide which voices are heard and which are silenced. They are the aristocracy of capital, disguised as modernity, talking about social responsibility while committing daily theft with silk gloves. And below, the worker is trapped in an endless cycle, working not to be free, but just to survive. Selling their life in exchange for a wage that is never enough. When they are exhausted, they are simply replaced by someone younger, cheaper, more exploitable. It's the perfect hell for the majority and the perfect paradise for those who control it. Capitalism is not in crisis, it works exactly as designed. Every day it concentrates more wealth at the top and more misery at the bottom. It disguises itself with new colors, speeches of progress, seductive propaganda, but the stench of blood and sweat is still the same. And here's the key: the dominant ideas of any era are always the ideas of the ruling class. Today those ideas are transmitted with a technological arsenal capable of shaping what you think and what you desire. Turn on the TV, open a newspaper, scroll through your social media feed, you'll see the same script repeated. The poor are lazy, violent, or incapable. Poverty is treated as an individual mistake, never as a structural problem. This manipulation goes far beyond the news. It's in series, music, soap operas, even textbooks. From childhood we are taught to admire the businessman and the investor as unique geniuses, when in reality they are beneficiaries of a system that drains collective labor. Meanwhile, the worker always appears as the eternal secondary character, endlessly striving for a prize that never comes. And the manipulation goes further, it creates false enemies to divert popular anger. Instead of directing rage against the billionaires who control the economy, the media teach us to blame the immigrant, the public worker, the poor person who receives aid, the unemployed, the internal enemy. It's the old strategy of divide and conquer. While workers fight among themselves, capital keeps accumulating without real opposition. The most powerful weapon of capitalism is not banks or armies, it is ideology. Marx warned of this clearly. The ruling class wins when the working class forgets that it exists as a class. And all the system's efforts are aimed at making that happen. Look at how language is manipulated. They don't say mass layoffs, they say restructuring. They don't say cuts to rights, they say reform. They don't call it hunger, they call it fiscal adjustment. It's the engineering of discourse, softening the crime so it looks like management. And when someone dares to point out the obvious, that the wealth of a few is the misery of millions, the system reacts with fury. That person is labeled radical, utopian, enemy of order. Because a conscious, organized, and critical population is the elite's worst nightmare. Propaganda never rests. Every day the same script is repeated: poverty is natural, inequality is inevitable, exploitation is collaboration. What should be scandalous is normalized. Theft is dressed up as business vision. Injustice is presented as a model of success. This is how an invisible wall is built in the worker's mind. Even when they feel exploitation in their own flesh, often they can't identify the real culprit. It's like walking in a walled city without realizing there's an exit. Ideology is more effective than weapons because it makes the oppressed carry their chains with pride. But ideology alone is not enough, it needs a silent ally. That ally is fear. Not a passing fear, but structural, everyday, political fear. Fear of losing your job, of not paying rent, of not being able to feed your children. Fear of getting sick and being left untreated. That fear is the invisible whip that forces millions to accept inhuman conditions. The most perverse part is that the system deliberately produces this insecurity. It's no accident that wages are insufficient, that contracts are precarious, that housing is unaffordable, and education turns into debt. A stable, fearless population could resist. That's why capital needs you to live always on the edge of the abyss. And when that fear threatens to turn into rage, the oldest trick in the book reappears: invent false culprits. The immigrant. The unemployed. The poor who receive aid. Frustration is redirected downward or sideways, never upward. While workers fight among themselves, the true culprits continue raking in record profits. Fear seeps into the everyday: the boss's late-night message, the delay in a payment, the threat of eviction, the power cut for an overdue bill. Each small wound feeds a permanent sense of vulnerability. And vulnerability means control. A worker who fears losing the little they have will accept anything: more hours, fewer rights, more humiliations. That is the secret of modern capitalism. It doesn't need physical whips or iron chains. Its chains are bills, debts, temporary contracts, impossible goals, and a fear that never lets go. And as long as we accept living this way, the machine will keep turning, crushing millions to sustain a few. Fear doesn't just empty pockets, it also empties the spirit. It becomes a silent poison that destroys trust, separates people, and blocks solidarity. And that is exactly what capital wants: isolated workers, each one struggling alone to survive, instead of united to change the system. At the top, the elite live without fear. They don't fear hunger, eviction, or losing their jobs. Their only real fear is that the majority will wake up. That's why they invest so much in propaganda, selective repression, and keeping insecurity as the norm. They know that the day fear turns into collective awareness, the invisible chains will begin to break. The most sophisticated trap of capitalism is not direct exploitation, but psychological conditioning. From childhood we are taught that work dignifies, that effort alone is enough to ensure stability, that the early bird gets the worm. But Marx saw it clearly: in this system, work does not liberate, it enslaves. It does not build autonomy, it builds dependence. The paradox is brutal. We have the most advanced technology in history and a productive capacity sufficient to guarantee well-being for all. Yet we work more than previous generations, in more precarious conditions, with less security. This is not progress, it is regression disguised as modernity. Capital has turned every minute into merchandise and every worker into a disposable part. The person doesn't matter, only the function. When they no longer serve, they are replaced without ceremony. The modern worker lives in an endless cycle of exhaustion, working to pay for the transport that takes them to work, for the food that lets them return the next day, for the roof under which they sleep to wake up and work again. It's a circle with no exit. And the most perverse part is that this sacrifice is presented as heroism. The worker is portrayed as an admirable warrior who gives everything for their family. But that heroism is a disguised prison. The real merit would be not having to give your entire life at work just to cover the basics. The real achievement would be having the right to live beyond the logic of survival. Capitalism flips the roles, we no longer work to live, we live to work. Long hours, suffocating goals, impossible deadlines, all designed to drain the energy that could be used to question and organize. A tired people is a controlled people. And if someone tries to escape this logic, the system drags them back with courses, training, and endless demands that consume time and money just to stay in the same place. It's the rat race, lots of effort, zero progress. Marx explained it better than anyone, wage labor is the clearest form of alienation. The worker creates goods they don't enjoy, produces wealth that will never be theirs, dedicates their life to goals that don't belong to them. And the most tragic part is that many don't even realize it. They sustain, with their effort, a machine that devours them. At its core, capitalism doesn't fear unemployment, it fears consciousness. Because consciousness exposes the fraud behind the promise of work as freedom. It reveals that while some accumulate unimaginable fortunes without lifting a finger, millions move the world without receiving anything in return. And it shows that true emancipation does not lie in working more, but in breaking the structure that turns work into a prison. The work that liberates is not the work that serves capital, but the work that serves life. Until this distinction is understood and defended collectively, workers will continue to believe they are climbing a ladder when in reality they are trapped on a treadmill, keeping them in the same place, or worse, pushing them closer to the abyss. Here we arrive at the synthesis, the point where all the pieces of this grim puzzle fit together. Marx did not write to comfort consciences or to offer consolation. He wrote to tear away the veil, to expose the machinery raw and bare. A global system designed to keep the poor eternally worried about money while feeding the insatiable luxury of the rich. It's not a coincidence, not just the way the world is, not a natural law. It is planning. It is social engineering built to concentrate power and wealth at the top while the base struggles for crumbs. Let's remember the structure. First, the invisible mechanism of surplus value, sucking the wealth created by the worker and delivering it to the capitalist. Then the always insufficient wage, calculated to maintain eternal dependence. Then the cycle of debt, mortgaging the future and turning it into a guarantee of exploitation. The lie of social mobility, upheld by the rare exceptions that serve as showcases to hide the rule. The invisible cost of survival, which transforms basic rights into expensive commodities. The permanent fear of misery, used as a psychological shackle to block rebellion. The ideological manipulation, shaping the worldview to blame the victim and protect the executioner. The obscene concentration of wealth, guaranteeing that nothing changes. And finally, work turned into a prison, not liberation. All of this forms a coherent, efficient, brutal system. A system that, contrary to what its defenders say, is not in crisis. It is working perfectly, exactly as designed. Misery is not a defect, it is a feature. Inequality is not a flaw, it is a goal. Unemployment is not a problem to be solved, it is a tool to discipline the workforce. Every part of the machine serves the same purpose, keeping the majority too busy, too tired, and too afraid to question the system. And here lies the decisive point. Marx not only diagnosed the disease but also pointed to the cure. He showed that liberation will not come from cosmetic reforms, from small concessions, from handouts disguised as social policies. Capitalism has the chameleon-like ability to absorb criticism, make superficial adjustments, and keep going intact. Real transformation requires rupture. It requires the working class to recognize its historic role, not as a mass of maneuver but as an active subject of change. It requires organization, awareness, solidarity. Capital fears this more than any economic crisis, because a conscious and organized working class is capable of paralyzing the machine. Without work, there are no profits. Without production, there is no accumulation. Without the base, the top collapses. That is why the entire effort of the system is aimed at preventing this awareness from spreading. That is why fear, debt, alienation, and propaganda are such valuable weapons for the elite. The catastrophic narrative is not exaggeration, it is the faithful portrait of reality. Billions live on the edge of the knife, at the mercy of economic fluctuations they do not control, political decisions they do not influence, corporations they do not know. Meanwhile, a minority enjoys fortunes capable of changing the course of history, but which are only used to expand their own power. This is capitalism in its purest form, a factory of inequality, sustained by the blood and sweat of the majority. But what Marx left as a legacy is more powerful than any military or financial arsenal, the understanding that none of this is inevitable. That systems are human creations and, therefore, can be torn down. That history is not a straight line but a battlefield between social forces. And that as long as there are workers willing to fight, the machinery can be broken. Capitalism wants us to believe there is no alternative. That is its greatest lie. But there is an alternative, and it begins when we look at reality without filters, recognize the enemy, and decide we will no longer accept being disposable parts of a machine that only serves to enrich a few. Marx showed the path. The rest depends on us. And the sooner we understand it, the sooner this story will stop repeating itself. If you liked this video, you'll also like the next one. Check out the video appearing on screen now.